primary focus of the amendment bill is that we want to allow people who could not get an opportunity to lodge claims within the prescribed period that ended on the 31st of December 1998. These are people who lost their land through discriminatory legislation of the past. In our consultation process around the Green Paper on land reform, we have found that quite a number of people who have successfully claimed their land have said to us, we have benefited from the restitution process, but we do know that there are people who were with us who were left out of the system. They have been encouraging government to consider reopening. Obviously, the numbers also speak for themselves. If you go to the research of forced removals, you would see that there's a report, for instance, that says 3.5 million people were removed during that time, but only just under 80,000 people lodged their claims. So there's a huge number of people that were left out of the system. This is the category of people that we are seeking to accommodate through this amendment.
Now, there was at a time, I don't know if through the amendments you deal with this, but those who were dispossessed as a result of betterment of and homeland consolidation, those were precluded from applying for land restitution. Is that correct?
That's a bit of a sensitive matter. They were not precluded in terms of the law. I think an impression was created that they would be dealt with in terms of a separate process. As a result, they did not lodge their claims by 31st December.
But where did that impression come from?
I think at the time when the process was open, I think there was a problem of interpretation of the legislation. It was mainly misinterpretation by some of the officials of the department itself at the time. And as such, people did not claim. But I think many people didn't see betterment, dispossession. So many of them also just did not consider themselves as victims.
Professor Mayende, you heard what Mr. Shabane was saying, that part of the problem may have been misinterpretation by government officials, but looking at Section 25 of the Constitution, does it exclude those who were dispossessed of land, especially prior to 19 June 1913 within that Betterment and Homeland Consolidations program?
There was, especially at the initial stages of the restitution period, that is from 1995 when it was launched to somewhere around 1999, there were issues around interpretation. And this is because at the time the approach, generally speaking, if I may say so, was very rigidly legalistic, where you had all claims being processed, not only through the Land Claims Commission, but also through the Land Claims Court. And the rigidity came in where, at the time, again, the Act, in terms of Section 2, I think it's 2(1)(a), in defining what kind of a person can claim, said this should be a person or community dispossessed of property on or after 19 June 1913 due to racially based laws. But then later on, this was changed to say racially based laws or practices. And the insertion of the term or practices is actually what brought about the change and made it possible for administrators, for people who were processing claims in the Land Claims Commissions to have a wider scope in terms of the people whom they could bring in or encourage to lodge their claims.
Perhaps, Mr. Shabane, we could get you to respond to some of that. It does sort of go back to the question that I was asking. How do you determine who is eligible for land? What instruments, land restitution or redistribution, how do you make those determinations? I know it's there within the Constitution and the Lands Act, but perhaps if you just expunge on it for us.
What is important is that as soon as the claim is received, one of the critical milestones in processing of the claim is that the department conducts in-depth research into the dispossession. This includes field work. This includes going into the archives, the interviewing of the members of the families that were directly affected. So research is quite a critical milestone in this particular exercise.
There is a complaint from TLUSA East in which farmers are saying that the organization has investigated something like 2,000 suspicious claims in Mpumalanga, the Northwest, and the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal as well. Are you aware of this, and that some of the claims were withdrawn after they were questioned?
That is going to happen as soon as the lodgement of the claim is opened. There are people who may not strictly follow the criteria. They may not be qualifying to claim, but they do then still continue to lodge their claims. And it is the function of the department to then investigate the claims. So if TAU says they've received suspicious claims, I don't think that is an indication that the department is not doing its work. That is why the Commission, after investigating claim, dismisses some of the claims because they do not meet the qualification criteria. Not every claim that is lodged qualifies, and therefore they get dismissed.
Perhaps, Professor Mayende, you'd like to comment on some of the issues that are being raised.
Yeah, just on the point that Ndu has been mentioning about investigating claims, about the research that has to be done. I think what needs to be highlighted here is that a lot of experience has been gained over the years. This process has been running for the past 18 years already. And in terms of methodology, the officials of the department who have to investigate claims, utilize a multiplicity of methods, which as a social scientist I would refer to as triangulation, if you like, a method where, different kinds of approaches to verifying the information are used. And indeed, experts are utilized in some instances, especially historians, anthropologists who, can assist with ethnographic and other forms of research and so on.
Randall in Cape Town, you say you want to claim your parents' land.
I just need to know from Mr. Mdu in regard of the Eastern Cape. My mother and my father has given me information as to land that they were dispossessed from. How do I do the necessary claim? Is it since my parents are both deceased?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randall. I've got an SMS here that says, can I claim land that was given to a chief, traditional leaders during creation of homelands? Mandla in Nelspruit wants to know. Perhaps I'll get Mr. Shabane, the DG, to answer this. Mr. Shabane?
If the bill is approved, what we have started doing now is to prepare for electronic lodgement of claims. Because one of the things we found is that there are people who then duplicate lodgement claims from the department and then use those to invite people to fill in. So our lodgement process is going to be much more tighter now. People are not going to just receive applications.
Professor Mayende, if you have any contribution to some of the questions being asked by the listeners, please go ahead and answer that. But I'd also like to talk about the research methodology with regards to the restitution process. Has it improved? Let's first start with the answers to the questions raised by the listeners, and then we'll go to that question.
Yes, so thank you very much. My view, I think, which is quite well known by now, on the whole issue of 1913 is that indeed it's really a severe constraint to limit claims to a date as recent as 1913, especially in the light of the fact that by then the bulk of the land had been taken away in any event. So it's almost like, akin to closing the stable door after the horse has bolted, where we have to say that, our approach is limited to claims that date after or from 1913 onwards. But I guess that's a debate that will be ongoing in our country for some time. Hopefully, I really do hope that at some point it will be resolved by way of saying perhaps we may have to relook the Constitution altogether in order to see if there is no way in which the whole issue of historical dispossession can be addressed. Now, on the issue of the gentleman in the Western Cape who said, can he lodge on behalf of his parents? Yes, indeed. I think even the legislation is quite clear that claims can be lodged by the claimant himself or herself, or the community itself, or their representative, or their direct descendants, and so on and so forth. But I'd just like to come very briefly on the issue raised by Tau SA, because I really think this cannot go unchallenged, where there are institutions and organizations in the country who are quick, to arrogate upon themselves, this thing about saying claims are illegitimate and so on and so forth, when in actual fact they are hell-bent on frustrating the process itself. And this is what I think has been experienced with institutions and organizations like Tau SA all along. What they are doing, instead of supporting the process, instead of doing anything positive, to support what is actually a national or should be a national project, which is part of the reconciliation process in the country, they're actually trying all the time to throw stones and throw spanners in the works, and then come up with this notion that there are claims that are illegitimate and so on. So the long and short of what I'm saying on this particular issue is that such allegations really need to be tested.
But how do we test them and how do we resolve them? Because some say they need a political resolution, Professor Mayende. And I'll come to the issue of people who say, I've heard this a lot on SAFM through callers saying, how do you claim land where nobody was occupying it? How do you prove that it was taken from you because that land was not being used? Some say that requires more a political resolution.
No, I think that the DG has hit the nail on the head, has been very correct on this issue, and I think has consistently and repeatedly said that the basis on which the determination would be made as to whether a claim is legitimate or not, or the process, is research. And I added my own view to this to say that the department over the years has really fine-tuned its methods in terms of research and ensuring and finding ways and means of ensuring that indeed these claims are found to be, those claims that are legitimate would be found to be legitimate because they will be researched thoroughly.
Speaking of research, there were complaints at some point that the system that you were using, the research system that you were using to verify some of these land claims were weak. Have you improved on it?
What we are doing is that we are mindful of the fact that we may not have all the capacity that we need. To improve that process, we have signed an agreement with, for instance, the Human Sciences Research Council to put a team together that will work together with the department, and we will also work with rural universities who are going to form part of these various research teams that are going to not only bring about much needed critical mass on the ground to research the claims speedily, but also to bring in high-level expertise at the level of those institutions to make sure that the research is credible, the state is not being accused of bias. And I think many of the institutions that I'm referring to, the universities, HSRC, pride themselves in quality research. So there should not be any space for people, for instance, like Tau, to then claim that the research itself was suspicious.